Justice Department announced a new rule to clarify who must obtain a federal firearms license.
Background check loopholes and unlicensed gun dealers have contributed to some of the most horrific and senseless tragedies.
This regulation is a historic step in the Justice Department's fight against gun violence.
The Biden administration announcing new changes to gun rules this morning, which will soon affect thousands of private sellers of firearms.
Gusted at the State House today in a public hearing over a last-minute push from Maine Democrats for a controversial red flag law.
So has the debate about whether new laws would be fair to law-abiding gun owners.
Federal rule on gun sales. Let's talk about these new federal rules on gun sales that the Biden administration is rolling out. It's like this. If you're planning to sell guns for profit, you better buckle up because there are some new hoops you'll have to jump through. First off, Uncle Sam is saying that if you're in the business of selling firearms to make some cash, you gotta get yourself federally registered. No more flying under the radar. They want to know who's in the game. It's like getting your official stamp of approval from the big guys up top. But wait, there's more. Not only do you need to register, but you also have to do background checks on potential buyers. That means no more shady deals in the dark corners of the internet or at flea markets. Whether you're selling guns online, at a gun show, or from a brick-and-mortar store, Uncle Sam wants to make sure you're doing your due diligence. Now, why all the fuss? Well, according to the Department of Justice, these regulations are a big deal. They're not just some random paperwork shuffle. They're aimed at tightening the reins on gun sales across the board.
Justice Department announced a new rule to clarify who must obtain a federal firearms license.
Background check loopholes and unlicensed gun dealers have contributed to some of the most horrific and senseless tragedies.
This regulation is a historic step in the Justice Department's fight against gun violence.
The Biden administration announcing new changes to gun rules this morning, which will soon affect thousands of private sellers of firearms.
The goal here is to have better control over who's buying firearms and where they're coming from. You see, the idea is to make it harder for guns to end up in the wrong hands. By requiring sellers to register and conduct background checks, the hope is that it'll help keep firearms out of the hands of folks who shouldn't have them, like criminals or those with a history of violence. So these rules are kind of a big deal. They're not just about paperwork, they're about making sure that when it comes to guns, we're doing everything we can to keep our community safe. And hey, if it means a little extra paperwork for sellers, well, that seems like a small price to pay for peace of mind, right? Closing the gun show loophole. Let's dive into this whole gun show loophole situation. You're at a gun show, browsing through rows of shiny firearms, and you come across a seller who's offering up some sweet deals. Now here's the kicker. Under the old rules, this seller might not have had to do a background check on you before handing over that gun. But not anymore. The Biden administration is cracking down on this loophole like a detective on a hot case. They're saying, hey, if you're selling guns for profit, whether it's at a gun show, online, or at your local store, you better be ready to play by the rules. And what are those rules? Well, first off, you gotta get yourself licensed. No more backyard gun deals without Uncle Sam's stamp of approval. And secondly, you've got to conduct background checks on your buyers. It's like a screening process to make sure the person walking away with that firearm isn't someone who shouldn't be. Now, why all the fuss about closing this loophole? The idea is pretty straightforward.
Plans to close the so-called gun show loophole, which is sparking Republican backlash on Capitol Hill.
Under this regulation, it will not matter if guns are sold on the internet, at a gun show.
New rules will require background screenings before anybody can buy guns online or in person at gun shows.
The administration took historic action to reduce the number of firearms sold to people without background checks.
To put a damper on unregulated gun sales. Without these regulations, there's a chance that firearms could end up in the wrong hands, like someone with a shady past or a history of violence. By requiring sellers to do background checks, it's like adding an extra layer of protection to make sure guns aren't falling into the wrong hands. But hold on a second, not everyone's on board with this crackdown. Critics are saying, hey, this gun show loophole isn't really the problem. They argue that only a small fraction of criminals actually get their guns from these shows. Instead, they point to a black market as the real culprit. So it's a bit of a debate. On one side, you've got folks saying these regulations are necessary to keep our communities safe. On the other, you've got skeptics questioning whether they'll make much of a difference in the grand scheme of things. But hey, at least we're having the conversation, right? because when it comes to gun safety, every little step counts. Criticisms and skepticism. Let's take a look at the skeptics and critics who are giving the side eye to the Biden administration's moves on gun regulations. Buckle up, because this is where things get a little spicy. First off, there are some folks out there who aren't buying into the whole good intentions spiel from the Biden camp. They're saying, hold up, this isn't just about closing loopholes, it's about sneaking in gun registration through the back door. In other words, they think Uncle Sam's trying to build a big old database of who owns what, and they're not too thrilled about it. Then there's the question of effectiveness. Critics are raising an eyebrow and asking, will these regulations actually make a dent in crime rates? They're worried that while the intentions might be noble, the reality might be a whole lot of hoopla without much to show for it. Plus, there's concern that these rules could step on our toes of the good old Second Amendment rights without doing much to stop the bad guys from getting their hands on guns. And let's not forget the elephant in the room, Congress. The skeptics are pointing out that passing universal background checks through Capitol Hill is about as likely as finding a unicorn in your backyard. So what's a president to do? Well, according to the critics, it looks like the administration is taking matters into its own hands with a little thing called executive action.
Anyone who sells firearms predominantly to earn a profit to become federally licensed and conduct background checks.
The Biden administration has unveiled a new federal rule to expand background checks for gun purchases.
Attorney General Merrick Garland unveiled a new rule to require mostly anyone who sells guns to run a federal background check.
To be licensed dealers, that is, people who are engaging in the business of selling guns for profit.
In other words, they're saying, if Congress won't do it, we'll do it ourselves. But that's got some folks feeling uneasy. They're worried that bypassing Congress sets a dangerous precedent and could lead to a whole lot of overreach down the road. So there you have it, skepticism and criticism galore. Whether you're worried about government overreach, questioning the effectiveness of these regulations, or just plain old suspicious of Uncle Sam's motives, one thing's for sure, the debate over gun control isn't going away anytime soon. Concerns about red flag laws. Let's talk about red flag laws. These little guys are causing quite a stir in the world of gun control, and not everyone's a fan. So what exactly are red flag laws? They're basically like a warning sign that says, hey, this person might not be in the best state of mind to have a firearm. The idea is to allow family members or law enforcement to petition a court to temporarily remove someone's guns if they're deemed a threat to themselves or others. Sounds like a good idea, right? Well, not so fast. Some folks are waving the red flag themselves, saying, hold on just a minute. They're worried that these laws trample all over our good old buddy, due process. See, the thing is, with red flag laws, someone's guns can get taken away based on nothing more than a hunch or a subjective judgment of their mental state, and that's got some people feeling mighty uneasy. Then there's the Second Amendment. You know, that little thing about the right to bear arms? Yeah. Well, some folks are saying that red flag laws stomp all over that too. They argue that it's a slippery slope from taking away someone's guns because they might be a threat to taking away everyone's guns just because the government feels like it.
Augusta at the State House today in a public hearing over a last-minute push from Maine Democrats for a controversial red flag law.
So has the debate about whether new laws would be fair to law-abiding gun owners.
The bill would effectively bypass the need for a mental health evaluation to remove someone's guns if a judge grants an emergency order.
State lawmakers are considering a red flag law, but there's considerable pushback to that idea.
And that's got people worried about potential government overreach and the erosion of our individual rights. I mean, let's think about it. If the government can swoop in and take away your guns just because they think you're a little off your rocker, what's next? Will they start taking away your rights to free speech or assembly? It's a scary thought, and it's got a lot of folks feeling like their freedoms are hanging on by a thread. So yeah, red flag laws might sound like a good idea on the surface, but scratch beneath that shiny veneer and you'll find a whole lot of concerns about due process, Second Amendment rights, and the ever-looming specter of government overreach. It's a debate that's sure to keep raging on as we try to navigate the tricky waters of gun control in this here country.
Since the shooting, I've started looking into gun safety laws, researching statistics about what works to keep the public the safest.
Regular warrants that would allow people to feel safe without infringing on the due process of gun owners.
Committee heard emotional testimony from hundreds of Mainers, both for and against the idea of implementing a red flag law.
San Diego lawsuit. This lawsuit out of San Diego is stirring up quite the debate about gun rights, particularly when it comes to who can carry firearms in California. So here's the scoop. A firearms advocacy group, along with 3 folks from Pennsylvania, Idaho, and New Mexico, are taking California to task over a law that pretty much says, non-residents, keep your guns at home. They're arguing that this regulation is a slap in the face to the 2nd and 14th Amendments and should be thrown out faster than yesterday's leftovers. The heart of the matter is this. These plaintiffs, despite being responsible gun owners with concealed carry permits in their home states, are being told they can't pack heat when they come to California, and they're not too happy about it. The lawsuit points out that crossing state lines shouldn't mean leaving your constitutional rights behind. Just like how you don't stop having freedom of speech or protection against unreasonable searches and seizures when you travel, these folks argue that your right to bear arms shouldn't vanish either. One of the plaintiffs, Christopher Hoffman, used to live in San Diego and had a concealed carry license issued by the Sheriff's Department.
Regardless of whether they're selling on the internet, at a gun show, or brick and mortar stores.
Following the rules, which includes getting licenses and running background checks.
The Justice Department just announced a new rule taking effect today that clarifies who must obtain a federal firearms license.
Or whether you're doing it at a gun show or whether you're doing it on a new social media platform.
Now, when he comes back to visit family and friends, he wants to be able to protect himself, but California's law is throwing up roadblocks left and right. But it's not just about these individual cases. The lawsuit is also taking aim at the broader issue, the idea that California can just slam the door shut on out-of-state gun owners without so much as a second thought. They're saying, hey, the right to bear arms doesn't end at California's border. That's all for this video, folks. We'll see you next time.